Hello Daily Drafters and welcome to the Duskmourn pre-release guide, here on the channel designed to get you ready for your pre-release events this weekend. This video will be full of useful information for beginners to seasoned veterans, whether this will be your first ever pre-release or if you're looking for Duskmourn specific information, such as a rundown on new and returning mechanics, limited archetypes, and more to make sure you are on top of your game at your LGS. So whether you're new here or you've been here a while, stay tuned for the ultimate guide in helping you crush your Duskmourn pre-release. Now, some of you might be asking yourself, what exactly is a pre-release? Well, each year there are roughly 4 main set releases of Magic the Gathering products, and most local game stores run what's called a pre-release for each of these main set releases. Essentially, you battle it out against your friends and strangers using several booster packs of the brand new cards for the upcoming set that has yet to be released, hence the name pre-release. If this sounds interesting to you, let's take a step-by-step look at exactly how these events are run. Step 1. Locate your local game store. In order to participate in a pre-release event, you'll need to find one. If you do not already have a local game store that you frequent, I've included a link in the description to a website that will help you find a game store running a pre-release event near you. Now that you've found where you'll be participating, it's time to get registered. Usually stores will run events all weekend, maybe one on Friday, 2 on Saturday, and 1 on Sunday. Check with your LGS to see when these events are happening and which ones you would like to attend. Be sure to note that sometimes these events do fill up fast, so you may need to pre-register to ensure you have a spot. It just depends on your store. Other times you can just walk right in and register on the spot, so be sure to find out what's best for your situation. Now that you're registered, it's time for the fun part. When it's time to start the event, you will get handed a pre-release kit like the ones on your screen now. For this set, there is only one pre-release kit that you can receive. In other sets, sometimes you have a choice, but for Duskmourn, we've got just the one. Now that you've got your kit, when the event begins, you will be instructed to open your kit and begin your deck build. It varies from store to store, but usually you will have about 50 minutes or so to build your deck and get ready for your matches. So let's take a look at what you'll find when you open your kit. Inside you will find one traditional foil rare or mythic rare from Duskmourn with a year stamp, and here's an example of what that card might look like using a rare from the last set, Bloomburrow, 6 Duskmourn play boosters, 1 20-sided spin down die, and 1 MTG Arena card. As many of you may be aware, draft boosters are now things of the past and were replaced with play boosters in the last few sets. This certainly threw a wrench in things when it came to drafting these last few sets, so I wanted to break down what Duskmourn will look like. They've kept it relatively simple for us here in the last couple of sets, as this set only has a small sheet of special guest cards that appear incredibly rarely, so it shouldn't be too difficult to explain. Every Duskmourn play booster will contain a variation on the following: 7 commons, and 1.5% of the time one of these 7 commons will be replaced by a special guest, of which there are these 10 for this set visible on your screen now, 3 uncommons, 1 non-foil wild card of any rarity from the main set, and usually this slot has about an 8% chance to be a rare or mythic rare. You'll also get 1 rare or mythic rare, and 1 foil card of any rarity, and again, this slot usually has about an 8% chance to be a rare or mythic rare. And the final slot will be a land card that will be a common dual land 50% of the time, and a regular basic land, either full art or regular basic the other 50% of the time. Alright, we now have everything we need to begin our deck build. If you'd like to see an example of a Duskmourn sealed deck build, stick around until the final segment of this video, which is time-stamped below, where I will build an entire sealed deck on screen for you to follow along with. After you've built your deck, you will then be assigned an opponent by the event coordinator and you will play out your first match. Different stores will give you different amounts of matches for the event, but it's usually a minimum of 3. Sometimes you might get lucky and be able to play 4 or more, it just depends. After you've finished your matches, you may qualify for some prizes, so be sure to check with the event coordinator to cash in on your winnings. So what I'm going to go ahead and do now is go over some of the new mechanics for the set, and go over the themes associated with the draftable archetypes, and just give you a general rundown of what's going on for Duskmourn before I do my deck build, so we both have a better idea of what to look out for. And our first new mechanic for this set is a new subtype of enchantments, which are rooms. Rooms are a new take on a split permanent card. Each room has 2 doors you can unlock. Simply cast either half of your room to unlock that door and have it exist on the battlefield as an enchantment, giving you its static effect. Later, if you have the mana to unlock the other door, you can pump that mana in and unlock the other side of the room for an additional effect. Note that this can be done at instant speed, and in fact even faster than instant speed, as it can't even be responded to by your opponent. Think of how fast you were able to flip your disguised creatures in Karlov Manor. It's similar timing to that. Rooms are incredibly flavorful here in the haunted house that is Duskmourn, and will certainly add an interesting twist to games of Duskmourn Limited. Another new mechanic found in this set is a take on an old one, Manifest Dread. Manifest Dread is a new take on the old Manifest mechanic, but a little juiced for 2024 Limited. If you are instructed to Manifest Dread, look at the top 2 cards of your library. You then choose one of those cards to manifest onto the battlefield as a face-down 2/2 creature with no name or text. The other card will make its way into your graveyard. Later, if you happened to manifest a creature face down, you can turn that creature face up for its mana cost if it is beneficial to you. Again, this is basically the exact same as Manifest used to be, except now you get a choice in which card goes to the battlefield and which card hits your graveyard. Survival is a new triggered ability that triggers at the beginning of your second main phase if the creature with Survival is tapped. It doesn't care how it was tapped. It could have attacked, been used to crew a vehicle, or tapped in any other way, but as long as it remains tapped, when the triggered ability resolves, you get a bonus. Think of this mechanic like Valiant from Bloomburrow. Any creature with Survival will be eminently clear as to what happens if its trigger resolves. Eerie is a new triggered ability that triggers whenever an enchantment you control enters the battlefield and whenever you unlock a room. It's a bit of a play on the old Constellation mechanic that triggers when an enchantment enters, but is reworded to include the unlocking of additional doors in your rooms for additional bonuses. Impending is the final new mechanic in Duskmourn and likely won't make too much noise in the format as it exists only on a cycle of 5 mythic rares, but in the interest of being thorough, Impending is an alternative cost similar to Suspend. If you chose to cast a spell for its impending cost, it will enter with a number of time counters on it. At the beginning of your end step, you will remove a time counter. As long as it has at least one time counter on it, it exists on the battlefield, but not as a creature. When the final time counter is removed, it is then a creature and can attack and block. Each of the overlords has an ability that triggers when it enters or attacks, so impending them early on might just be what you need to do in some games. That does it for the new mechanics, so let's check out the draftable archetypes that Duskmourn will feature, each of which are visible on your screen now. We've got a few themes that cross over between archetypes, like both blue-white and blue-black caring about eerie triggers, with one being more of a tempo deck and the other leaning a bit more into a control feel. There's a chance there might be a sweet Esper eerie deck hiding out there somewhere if the mana fixing is good enough. Similarly, both green-red and green-black care about Delirium, with one being a stompy deck and the other caring about grinding using the graveyard. This seems just about as classic a Jund deck that you can find here in Duskmourn. Green-white and red-white are both aggressive decks, with red-white being advertised as simply an aggro deck. Stop me if you've heard that story before. And green-white gets to play the most with the new survival mechanic, likely through attacking and pushing damage. The remaining 4 decks seem a little unrelated to each other, but boy have we got a cool one with black-white Reanimator this time around. This is a classic vintage cube archetype that makes its way into Duskmourn, so let's hope it's got the legs to compete in this less powerful format. Black-red gets a theme that it gets quite often, but is a fan favorite, and that is Sacrifice. These cards care about sacrificing both creatures and enchantments, ideally old rooms that you no longer have any use for. Speaking of rooms, blue-red is the deck that cares the most about rooms, including cards that pay you off for opening doors and playing enchantments. It'd be pretty sweet if this deck existed as a near creatureless deck with tons of rooms giving you all sorts of value, but I have my suspicions. And the final unique deck is blue-green, which gets to play in the Manifest Dread space the most. This mechanic seems powerful enough on its face that I'm sure building around it will be an enormous advantage if you have the time in the format to do so. Now, the hardest part about the whole event is building your deck, but good news, I will now go through an entire Duskmourn sealed deck build to give you an idea of what you want to be looking out for in your pool of cards and how to maximize your chance of having a competitive deck for the event. But before we do, if you enjoyed this content or any other content on the channel and would like to give back, I do have a Patreon with a link both in the description and on your screen now. For those of you that don't know, Patreon is a great way to give back to creators that provide you with content that you enjoy, and mine is no different, except for the fact that my Patreon is among the most affordable Patreons in the entire Magic community. I have just 2 tiers available for either $1 US per month or $3 US per month. Like, that's it. Less than a daily cup of coffee for a whole month's worth of support. There's also absolutely no expectation of commitment, as it is a come and go as you please system. You can support for 1 month and then discontinue and then rejoin later. It's completely up to you. Support on Patreon helps keep the lights on here at Daily Draft, so if you enjoy the content I make and would like to pay it forward, feel free to check it out and throw a couple of bucks my way. Thanks so much for your consideration. Alright, here we are in today's sealed deck build. So before I get started, I'm going to go ahead and clarify exactly how I'm doing, what I'm doing here today. If I don't usually clarify it myself, somebody will ask, so I'll do it out of the gate here. In order to generate a sealed pool to build here, I went to, as you can see to my left here, the site draftsim.com. You can generate sealed deck pools, and you can also actually draft against bots before releases on Arena on DraftSim. It's a great resource to do that. I don't like their deck building interface quite as much as where I am right now, which you can see to my left now, sealeddeck.tech. So if you go ahead and import your DraftSim pool into sealeddeck.tech, this is what the interface looks like when you get through. If you do choose to practice like this, quick note, it doesn't recognize room cards right now. It just lists them as like Glassworks space Shattered Yard. You have to put 2 slashes in between Glassworks and Shattered Yard. You have to do that manually. Otherwise, it'll just show up as like a blank Magic card with no text on it. So you have to do that if you want your room cards to show up as well. So the first thing I like to do when I get a sealed pool at my local LGS for deck building is sort by rarity. You want to see what rares you have and if they're going to be any good for you. And here we have 3 mythics and 4 rares. Not too bad. 1 more than the expected. Actually, 7 is the expected because you get 1 for free in your pack as well as 6 packs with at least 1 each. So we got the minimum, but that's okay. I notice we have 3 green and 2 red, as well as a blue and a black. I don't think the black one's very good. I mean, it's Delirium Demonic Tutor. And if you don't have Delirium, it probably doesn't do anything. I don't know how many demons there are in the set. Abhorrent Oculus, 3 mana, 5/5. You have to exile 6 cards from your graveyard to cast it. It has flying. And at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep you manifest dread. Seems pretty darn good, unless you can't really fill your graveyard well. What else do we have? We do have one of the Overlords. This Overlord cycle is pretty good here. Really would like to try to fit this into my deck if at all possible. Enduring Courage, 4 mana, 3/3. Whenever another creature enters, it gets +2/+0 in haste. Boy, is that aggressive. And when it dies, it returns back to the battlefield as an enchantment. That's not a creature, so it still has that ability. Pretty darn aggressive there. Tyvar, 3 mana, 3/3. Can protect itself with indestructibility. Omnivore's Flytrap, 3 mana, 2/4. When it enters or attacks, if you have Delirium, you distribute 2 counters among 1 or 2 creatures. Then if there are 6 or more card types, you double those counters. Pretty good. And Balustrade Worm, 5 mana, 5/5, trample haste, can't be countered, and can return to the battlefield if you have Delirium. So I immediately notice a red-green deck over here. That's not to say we have to play red-green, but in sealed, if you can fit as many of your good rares in your deck as you can, that's a great way to start. So based on what we just did, if I could try to get some of these red and green rares in here, I mean, this is like what I'm trying to start with. I don't have a ton of red cards, but something I do notice Scorching Dragonfire. Removal is always great in sealed, and this is 2 mana deal 3. Exile it in a set that cares about Delirium. That's also pretty darn good, and I've got 3 of them in this pool, so pretty incentivized to do that. Let's see if the rest of my red cards are any good here. Turn Inside Out. You give a creature +3/+0. When it dies this turn, you manifest Dread. I am much more likely to like this card than many other people. Is this very similar to the Strixhaven card? It's like a red-white hybrid card that get +2/+0 and died into a 2/2. That just seems like really good to me. Hand That Feeds is an aggressive 2-drop. Seems fine. Fear of Being Hunted, 3 mana 4/2 haste. Maybe. Here's Glasswork Shattered Yard, like I mentioned before. 3 mana deal 4. And then you just flood later in the game, spend 5, and beginning your end step, this deals 1 damage to them. Interesting. 4 mana 5/6 Menace with Mountain Cycling. 6 mana 5/6. And then the Enduring Courage as well. So even though we don't have a ton of red cards, I noticed that they're actually pretty playable here. We've also got the Balustrade Worm. What do we have here? Patchwork Beastie, 1 mana 3/3. Can't attack or block unless you have Delirium. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you mill a card. So that's going to be a good way to help us get to Delirium. We've got 2 of these. So that's pretty nice. Horrid Vigor is a combat trick. Fine. Monstrous Emergence. We do have some big creatures. This is like a removal spell. Break Down the Door. That's more of a sideboard card. Say Its Name is a decent little way to fill your graveyard. And just, put a creature from your graveyard into your hand. It's kind of like, Cash Grab and the card from Modern Horizons that gave you an Eldrazi spawn, except this one doesn't really give you anything on the battlefield. It has this extra text, but in Sealed, that's probably not going to happen. You have to have 3 Say Its Names, and they all have to be in your graveyard, and you have to have the Atlanach, which we do, but we don't have 3 of these. But I think one of them is still good enough to play. Spineseeker Centipede, 3 mana 2/1 with Delirium. It becomes a 3/3 with Vigilance. It also just draws a land when it enters, so I mean that's not too bad. It's not great. Under the Skin, you manifest Dread and then also return a permanent from your graveyard to your hand. Yeah, it seems fine. Anthropede, 4 mana 3/4 reach. And then you can either discard a card or pay 2 to destroy a room. Bashful Beastie, 5 mana 5/4 when it dies, manifest Dread. It's pretty good. I don't know how many of those I would play. And then a 6 mana Forest Cycling, 7/6 Trample. It's also just fine, I guess. And I mean, this is already 23 with 17 lands right here. We've got a couple extra cards. There are some. Oh, I didn't even notice the Wildfire Wickerfolk. Goodness gracious, how many W's can they put in a card name? 2 mana 3/2 haste, and then if you have Delirium, it gets +1/+1 and trample. Yeah, these are going in. So we with this red-green deck, we would actually have some cuts to make, which is kind of insane. So this is where my attention goes to first, and I noticed for myself, and I think you'll probably notice if you do this as well, is that most of the time your first intuition is correct. It's kind of the direction you want to go, especially because your first intuition is kind of to fit some of these rares in here. So this is where I would kind of land after a first glance. Now again, like I mentioned, you do have 50 minutes to build this, so you can check out some other builds as well. And what I'm going to do now is, I'd be shocked if I find something better than this, but I'm going to go ahead and play around with maybe our white and our black. We do have Inquisitive Glimmer, which is good, and some good white and blue. Well, I don't know if it's good, but some decent number of white and blue. And Brood Spinner with green black, but then we leave out 3 Scorching Dragonfires. I do like this, but I'm going to go ahead and just make a quick cut and see if I can come up with anything better. And if not, I'll optimize this red-green list, and that'll be it for this. See you in a second. So after toying with it a little bit, I found kind of this cute little package in black-white, which I mentioned earlier is a Reanimator deck, this format. We've got, Emerge from the Cocoon, which is a Reanimate spell, Live or Die, which is another Reanimate spell, and Surgical Suite, which also, whenever you unlock that door, you get to bring back a 3-drop or less. So this is kind of interesting, but in black and white, we don't really have a lot of great cards to be reanimating. Fear of Abduction seems kind of cute. 6 mana 5/5 flyer that kind of like, eats one of their creatures and one of your own, but when it dies or leaves the battlefield, you both get those back. Appendage Amalgam is like fine, to work with Surgical Suite and things, but like everything else is not great. Also, our blue, I looked at blue white, but first of all, we don't have a ton of enchantments, and like almost all of these cards are counter spells. So Don't Make a Sound is the Quench variant. Counter unless they pay 2. What else we got? Twist Reality, another counter spell. Fear of Imposters, a counter spell. Like, we have so many counter spells, but not actually a ton of enchantments. I mean, Glimmer Burst is an enchantment. That seems like a pretty good card because it does make an enchantment creature. Clammy Prowler is an enchantment. Fear of Imposter, I just don't think this card is good. There is a room here. So 1 mana Surveil 2, and then 4 mana Manifest Dread and put a counter on it. That's not too bad. I just don't think, like I said, all of our rares are over here in this red-green deck. So it would take a lot of synergy for me to move off of that. And this is kind of the process I go through. I kind of set this aside and take a look at the rest of the cards that I've got to see if anything's going to pull me out and away from my initial thought of where I should go with the deck. And based on where I kind of landed after looking through this, I don't think that's going to happen. So I'm going to go ahead and cut back to what will end up being my final version of the build of this deck here. Okay, so here's where I ended up with a 23 card deck and 17 lands here, and just a good old red-green stompy deck. Sometimes you just get a couple of good rares, you throw them in your deck and sealed, and you draw them and you play them and you win. It's really all you need. We got early removal, 4 2-drops and 2 1-drops. The beasties will help us with Delirium early in the game. So we'll say its name, so on and so forth. So this is where I would end up. Like I said, trust your gut, go with your rares, like find the rares you've got, see what the good ones are, and see if the rest of your pool can support that. Most of the time they can. Sealed is a little bit slower of a format, so if you have time to draw those rares and put them on the battlefield, it's usually good enough in a lot of cases here, especially with cards like Under the Skin to get some of those rares back if they die. So like I said, this is where I'd end up. I would add some lands to this and play this if this is what I pulled at my local pre-release. So hopefully this sort of tutorial helped you out a little bit here today, and good luck at your pre-release. Thanks for tuning in. I hope this video was helpful to you and helps you build up the courage needed to go participate in a pre-release event at your LGS this weekend. If you've never been to one before, I highly recommend it. It's really one of the absolute most fun ways to play Magic, and you'll meet tons of different players there. If you do end up going, return back to this video and leave a comment and let me know how it went for you. I'd love to hear feedback from each of you about your event. Thanks so much for sticking around until the end of the video, and I will see you here soon at Daily Draft.